Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Dana and I am really glad to have you here today. You smiling? Aww. Today's video is actually not a planned one. I was actually sitting down at our computer last night and I was kind of creating a printable / outline for our family's rhythm. That way my kids could kind of see a visual representation of kind of what our days will look like. That way they know what's going on. Anyway, that is for another video. But where I was going with that is yesterday, after I was designing kind of that to print out, I also kind of put together a list of 12 things for me as a mama to remember. And this is not just a list of 12 things to do or to honestly, I should call it 12 truths to remember. They're just 12 things to kind of remind myself, so when I do print this out and put this on our fridge, because I'm always in the kitchen cooking, it feels like, I'll be able to be reminded throughout the day of these 12 truths that I honestly just kind of want to reflect on and kind of train my whole thinking and mindset around these things, if that makes sense. But anyway, some of these things are a little bit cliche, so just as a heads up, not all of them are new concepts or ideas, but they are just 12 things I am trying to remember. So let's go ahead and get into today's video. So the first thing I put on my list, and these things are in no particular order, but the first thing that I did put on my list is that it is okay to take a break. This is something that is really hard for me, and honestly something that I consider to be quite a challenge for me. It is really hard for me to completely just turn my mind off, sit down and just be still for a few minutes. I am really busy during the day. I definitely don't sit down much, and when I do sit down, it's normally to read a book to my kiddos or to cuddle with my kiddos and things like that. And beyond that, I don't really have moments in my day where I can consciously, actively, and intentionally just be still. And so I'm trying to get into a different mindset and kind of train my thinking a little bit different to where it is okay to just sit down for a few minutes, especially if I need to, and let that be okay. It's okay to take a break, and I know other people probably need that reminder too, but it's a big thing that I need to actually work on actively. So the second thing on my list, or the second truth that I am trying to remember, is that getting behind is not failure. And this is especially in reference to my homeschooling journey, and specifically my really bad morning sickness phase with this little one, and kind of feeling really bad in those first few months of feeling like I was failing, especially when it came to my homeschooling, because all the curriculum that we were doing told me I was behind, because we obviously weren't where we should have been. But I wanted to remind myself of this and any other mamas who are going through challenging seasons in life, to remind you and honestly remind myself that when you're behind, it's not because you're failing. It honestly may just mean that we need to take a break and rest, like I mentioned in my first point, but it doesn't mean that we're failing. And I look back at my first few months here of being pregnant with her, and just how big of a step back that we had to take for our family because I just couldn't do anything. The next thing that I am trying to remind myself is that it is okay to have a bad day. And honestly, this point will flow into my next one, and you'll see why here in a moment. But I just wanted to remind myself that every single person has a bad day. Like our little people do, us as adults do. Every single person will have them. This does go into my next point of that a lot of the times bad days are because of just a bad minute in that day. And it's hard to get out of that mood when those things happen. And so I'm trying to remind myself that just because I have a really bad moment of the day, it doesn't make a whole bad day. And I always try to not refer to days as being bad. And sometimes at the end of the day, I'll look back and be like, that was a hard day. Some days are just hard, and that's okay. So trying to retrain my brain to, rethink of those bad moments, and so it doesn't turn into the whole day being bad. Another thing that I really struggle with, and something that I've kind of talked myself maybe into getting better at, and honestly this is why it's on the list, and that is that asking for help is actually a strength. And I call it a strength because for me it is. I am the type of person that I typically like to just do it all myself because I'm afraid I'm going to inconvenience somebody, and I don't want to inconvenience anybody or cause anyone to go to any trouble. It's funny because in the rare few times that I have actually asked for help, it's always 100% yes, absolutely, I'll be there. And so I'm just like, I don't know why I don't like asking, but I don't want to be like, I'm always afraid of inconveniencing somebody, and we'll get into that to another point here in a little bit. But I think it's more of the not wanting to inconvenience people, and with a mix of thinking I can do it all when I can't sometimes. So yes, asking for help is a strength, is a huge thing I have to remember sometimes. A huge part of my thing too, where I tend to be a little bit more of a people pleaser than I probably should. And so this next point is that I'm trying to remember that not everybody has to like you. And not just be okay with people not liking you, but also just kind of accept it wholeheartedly and be like, it is 100% okay if they don't like me. Because at the end of the day, you can be 100% authentically yourself, and there will still be people that they don't either understand you, they don't like you, or anything like that. And I feel like as long as you are 100% authentically yourself, then there is nothing that you can do to cause other people to like you. And so to let that go, I think there's a big freedom in letting go of that idea that everyone is going to like you, and realize that not everyone will. And I think there's a lot of freedom in realizing that, because you don't want to have to change who you are and what you believe in order to make other people happy, which is hard for me because sometimes I want to like do the people pleasing thing to keep the peace and to keep people happy, but at the end of the day, I think that will just hurt. I think that just hurts me more, if that makes sense. So just a reminder that it's okay if people don't like you. 100% okay. Another big thing that I am learning, and this goes back to my first few points of kind of learning how to rest and take a step back, and that getting behind is not failure. And the next point is that small steps are still moving forward. Like, small steps are still success. It doesn't matter how little the steps are, as long as you're still moving forward, that is huge success in and of itself. And when I mentioned my previous season, it's really easy to lose sight of the big picture when the day-to-day might not change much. What I mean by that is, for example, working with my kindergartner and sight words, like one day it might not look different from the next day because they're working on the same words. But when I look back at how far we've come from last year, it's huge. And so I'm trying to train my brain to think about the bigger picture rather than worrying about like the little steps. Like, I know we're struggling in one area, but we're great in this area, but wow, overall, like compared to last year, it's huge. And so trying to get myself to remind myself about just like the bigger picture, the big picture overall, instead of worrying about the little things. And this goes with like motherhood and my like walk with Christ and everything like that. Even though I might not seem like you're growing every single day, looking back at where you were last year, what your thought patterns were last year, and things like that, it's just very big difference. So even though they might seem small steps, they are huge. And I'll probably realize that again next year when I'm looking back and be like, wow, those little steps really did add up to a whole year of accomplishing great things. So the next two things also go hand in hand. I feel like everything eventually blends together, but this is another cliche saying that I wanted to mention, but I also need reminded of, and not necessarily always need reminded of, because the second point that goes to this is something I need reminded of. But the number one thing that honestly would be number one is to always, at the forefront of our minds, especially my mind, to always remember that God is good. And He has been so good and faithful in literally every single aspect of my life. He has been so good, and to constantly think about that throughout the day, to dwell on the blessings and not necessarily what you might not have, but really, yeah, just the blessings of life in general. Which flows into my next point, and that is that if not, ... God is still good. There has been, I'm going to try to explain what I mean by that, but there has been so many times in my life that I have maybe prayed the same prayer 5 years, 6 years. The specific prayer I'm thinking of prayed for 8 years. And, you know, God didn't answer this prayer until like 8 years later. And then when you look back and see every single piece of the puzzle that went together because of that unanswered prayer, and every person's life that was touched, and every person's faith that grew because of it. Well, because of Him not answering that prayer back when I thought maybe it should be answered, you know, because when you first start praying for a specific thing, you're just like, God, please, and then you state the prayer request or your request to God. Let your request be known, as the Bible says. And then as a Christian, it's hard because you're just like, okay, God, you can answer anytime now. And so like 8 years later, when He finally does, and maybe in the process of the 8 years, yes, my faith grew like hugely. But then looking back at everything, your faith grows even more because you're just like, none of this would have happened. None of these beautiful things would have happened if he would have answered it in my timing. Instead, he did it in his timing, because even though we can't see, there's so many things that he wanted to do. There's so many people he needed to work on, so many people's lives that he needed to touch before he could answer the prayer. And I'm trying to remember that if not, like if God does not answer our prayer right away, so if not, God is still good. He is always good and faithful. And for me as a Christ follower to actually remind myself of that when the times are coming when I'm just praying the same prayer, to still make my requests be known unto him. And yes, even though he already knows the desires of our hearts, to still make the requests be known unto him, because that's what he asks us to do. That's what we're commanded to do. And yes, he already knows, but having our faith grow because prayers are not answered is something that I am trying to kind of cherish and embrace more, I should say. But yes, if not, God is still very good. So the last thing that is actually on my list, the other one I added on, and that is to remind myself and speak the truth to myself that I just need to be more kind to myself. We just need to give ourselves more grace and more kindness. And being a parent, it is so easy for us to speak kindness to our kids, to teach them how to be kind to one another, to show them kindness, to teach them, like I said, to show kindness to other people, to be respectful and things like that. But when it comes to being kind to ourselves, sometimes it's hard because I can really beat myself up sometimes. Like, mother guilt is a really, really big thing. And I wish it wasn't, but it is. And so at the end of every single day, like laying in bed and you're saying, at least I'm saying in my head so many nights, like, I wish I would have spent this much more time with the little ones. I wish I had 2 more hours in the day so I could have done this with this child and everything like that. To give myself grace, to honestly accept the fact that yes, I did the best that I could today with the resources that I have been given and things like that, and give myself, to show myself more kindness and more grace. Because like I said, it's easy to teach our kids that, but they know and they witness us. And if we're not kind to ourselves, I feel like it won't be portrayed out onto them, if that makes sense. So teaching myself to think and to, honestly, it's something that I have to pray about too, because when you are kind to yourself and when you do show yourself more grace, I think that really does reflect onto the kiddos, because you're able to show them more kindness and grace easier and just like more fluently, I should say. But getting better at that, and I feel like being kind to yourself is a whole thought process pattern thing where you almost honestly have to train your brain to think like that, because it can be so hard to have your brain run away with all kinds of different thoughts and everything. And yeah, it's hard. It can be challenging. So being kind to yourself is definitely a big one. And the last one is something that I'm going to probably add onto the list, but it's extremely cliche. And I'm sure everyone's probably tired of hearing this because they're like, yes, everyone tells me that, But I did want to mention it because I did put it on my, or will be putting it on my list as a reminder for those really, really long days. And that is a reminder, and the main reminder of that the days are very, very long, but the years are short. And honestly, even opening up my phone and seeing previous kids' photos from the previous year and seeing how much just the little faces have changed over the past year and how much their personalities have changed over the past year is just a huge reminder for me personally to not let those thought processes sneak in when those days are long, So to always remember that yes, this day is extremely long right now, a lot of days are really long, is to remind myself that yes, boy are they long, but this year is gonna fly by. And it's crazy just how quickly it flies by. And I'm praying that I can be more content with the exact day and season I am in better, so I can actually see that with the bigger picture. As I mentioned, the bigger picture being a huge part into your overall view and things of life in general. But just learning to be content with exactly where we are. And I feel like contentment, going off of a rabbit trail here, but contentment is such a huge piece to, I feel like, joy and the piece of your life, at least for me, is learning how to be content. Because if you are not, it's always going to be grass is always greener on the other side. If we go here, it will make us happier. If we do this, it will make me happier. If we do this or have this, it will make me happier. And I think contentment is really hard, especially in today's world and society, because everything around us is telling us that this will make us happy. Everything around us is telling us, well, if you do this, it will make you happy. If you go here, it will make you happy. When in reality, where we are in this minute, in this hour, in this week, where we are physically even, is exactly where God wants us to be. And I feel like the more that we embrace that and cherish that fact that we are nowhere where He doesn't want us to be. So right here where I am, like standing here, is where God has called me. And so if I am able to embrace that and practice contentment in every season aspect of life, I feel like that's where that true joy and peace comes in. And then I can again bestow that upon my little people as well, so they can also learn how to be content in life with whatever God has given them. And things like that. But yeah, that was a big rabbit trail. I don't even know what point that came off of. But anyway, I hope you guys got some encouragement from this video. I know just talking out everything of my kind of thinking processes through this has been a blessing to me. And like I said, this is a thing that like you have to train your brain to think about. So I'm gonna print it out so I can always see it and try to, to create different thought patterns. I feel like creating different thought patterns when you've been stuck in the same thought pattern for so long is one of the hardest things to do. Hence why I'm gonna print this out and look at the reminders as much as I can and things like that. But until my next one, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, whatever you're doing, and God bless. Bye.